In the final desperate years of World War II, Japan unleashed a fighter so advanced it sent shockwaves through the United States Army Air Forces. This wasn't another fragile, easily flammable Zero. This was a monster, a machine that could climb like a rocket, dive with shocking speed, and hit with the force of a heavyweight boxer. Welcome to Historical Digs, where today we revisit the epic story of the Ki-84 Hayate. This is the story of a plane that on paper was perhaps the single best fighter of the Pacific War. But this is also a story of what happens when genius is sabotaged by desperation, when a perfect weapon is born into a dying empire. A desperate gambit. To understand the Ki-84, you have to understand the sheer desperation of 1942. The Doolittle raid had struck Tokyo. The Battle of Midway had broken the back of the Imperial Japanese Navy's carrier fleet, and the American industrial might was beginning to churn out new, powerful fighters like the P-38 Lightning and the F-4U Corsair. The Japanese Army Air Force knew its existing fighters, like the nimble but lightly armed Nakajima Ki-84 Oscar, were rapidly becoming obsolete. They needed a true multi-role fighter, an aircraft that didn't just excel at one thing, but was brilliant at everything. It had to have the agility of a dogfighter, the speed and climb rate of a high-altitude interceptor, and the ruggedness and firepower of a ground attacker. The task fell to Nakajima Aircraft Company and a design team led by Yasushi Koyama, a veteran of earlier Army fighters like the Ki-27, Ki-43, and Ki-44. The demand from high command was simple yet almost impossible. Create a fighter that could decisively beat anything the Allies were putting into the sky. The heart of this new machine was to be the Nakajima HA-45 Homare engine. On paper, it was a masterpiece, a compact 18-cylinder air-cooled radial engine rated for a colossal 2,000 horsepower. This engine would allow the new fighter, designated Ki-84, to achieve speeds approaching 430 miles per hour. Around this powerful heart, Koyama's team sculpted a sleek, modern airframe that was built for speed and survivability. Unlike the Zero, the Ki-84 was built for survivability. It featured a heavily armored pilot seat and headrest, and its wings were fitted with rudimentary self-sealing fuel tanks, a direct lesson learned from the fiery fate of so many earlier Japanese aircraft. Its armament was equally formidable. The standard loadout featured two 12.7mm machine guns in the fuselage, and more importantly, two powerful 20mm HO5 cannons in the wings. This gave the Hayate the punch needed to tear through the armor of American bombers and fighters alike. The prototype first flew in April 1943, and its performance was breathtaking. It was exactly what the Army had dreamed of: fast, agile, heavily armed, and tough. It could outturn a P-47 and climb with or even surpass a Mustang at lower altitudes. The Gale was ready. The problem was, the empire it was meant to defend was already beginning to crumble. Before we dive deeper into the Hayate's story, hit that like button and subscribe to Historical Digs. Your support helps us unearth the untold stories of aviation's most battle-hardened war machines. A nasty surprise over China. The Ki-84's combat debut came in the summer of 1944 over China, flown by the 22nd Sentai. For Allied pilots who had grown accustomed to a certain level of superiority, the first encounters were a brutal shock. The tactics pioneered by the American volunteer group, the famed Flying Tigers, and later refined by the U.S. 14th Air Force, had proven highly effective against earlier Japanese fighters like the Ki-43 and the Zero. They used their heavier, faster P-40s and P-51s to make high-speed diving attacks against the more fragile Japanese fighters, which couldn't keep up in a dive or survive the punishment of 50 caliber rounds. The Ki-84 changed that equation completely. When American pilots dove on a Ki-84, they were stunned to find it could often roll and pull away, or worse, meet their dive and climb away with astonishing speed. The Hayate's combination of a powerful engine and a low wing loading gave it a phenomenal rate of climb and excellent acceleration. In a dogfight, it was a terrifying opponent. It didn't have the Zero's almost supernatural turning ability at very low speeds, but at combat speeds, it was far more dangerous, retaining energy beautifully and able to switch from defensive to offensive maneuvers in a heartbeat. Allied intelligence was initially baffled. They didn't have a name for this new fighter, and its performance so wildly exceeded expectations that it earned the male codename Frank, a designation reserved for new Army fighters, and this one immediately stood out as a significant threat. The psychological impact was immense. Bomber crews who had already faced perilous missions now had to contend with an interceptor that could climb to their altitude with ease and make devastating high-speed attacks with its cannons. A single well-placed burst from the Ki-84's 20mm cannons was often enough to cripple a B-25 or a B-24 bomber. Reports from the China-Burma-India theater are filled with accounts of pilots being bounced by Franks that seemed to appear out of nowhere from below. The Hayate quickly gained a reputation as an energy fighter par excellence. Its arrival meant that no American fighter could assume an automatic advantage. The playing field had, for a brief moment, been leveled. But this early success hid a dark and fatal secret that was already beginning to unravel back in Japan. The Achilles heel. The Ki-84 Hayate was a thoroughbred racehorse, but it was being fed a diet of grass and water. Its greatest strength, the 2,000 horsepower Homare engine, was also the most fragile link in its impressive design, powerful on paper but plagued by real-world limitations. The engine was a complex, high-performance piece of machinery that demanded high-quality materials, precise manufacturing, and expert maintenance, three things that late-war Japan was critically short of. As Allied submarines choked off supply lines, the high-grade steel alloys needed for engine components became scarce. Factories were forced to use substandard metals, which led to constant and catastrophic engine failures. The problems didn't stop there. Allied bombing raids on Japanese industrial centers, particularly the Musashino engine plant, shattered production lines. Experienced machinists and technicians were drafted into the military, replaced by unskilled laborers, including students who struggled to maintain the microscopic tolerances the Homare engine required. The result was an engine that rarely, if ever, produced its advertised horsepower. Many operational engines produced closer to 1,600 horsepower, with field units reporting chronic overheating, oil leaks, and abrupt engine seizures. Furthermore, the hydraulic systems for the landing gear and the electrical systems for the cannons were notoriously unreliable. A squadron might have a dozen brand new Ki-84s on its airfield, but on any given day, often fewer than half were flight ready. Fuel was another crippling issue. The high-compression Homare engine was designed to run on high-octane aviation fuel. By 1944, Japan's supply of high-quality gasoline were nearly exhausted. Pilots were forced to use low-grade fuel, often mixed with alcohol, which further reduced engine performance and caused even more maintenance nightmares. Add to this a severe shortage of experienced pilots. The veteran aces who had dominated the skies in 1941 and 1942 were almost all gone. New pilots were rushed through training with barely enough flight hours to handle such a powerful and demanding aircraft. They were being sent into battle against highly experienced Allied pilots in superior numbers. It was a recipe for disaster. The Ki-84 was a perfect sword, but it was being forged in a crumbling smithy and wielded by a weakening arm. The Hayate's final stand. Despite the production chaos, the Ki-84s that did make it to the front lines fought with incredible ferocity during the final year of the war. During the invasion of the Philippines and the battle for Okinawa, the Hayate was Japan's premier air superiority fighter. It was in these desperate battles that it went head-to-head with the best of the U.S. Navy and Army Air Forces, the F-6F Hellcat and the P-51D Mustang. In the hands of a skilled pilot with a properly functioning engine, the Ki-84 was more than a match for either. It could outmaneuver the Mustang below 20,000 feet and was generally considered more agile than the Hellcat. As the war drew to its brutal conclusion, the Hayate was tasked with the most desperate mission of all, the defense of the home islands against the relentless onslaught of B-29 super fortresses. The Ki-84 was one of the few Japanese fighters that could reliably reach the B-29's high operational altitude. Special ramming units were formed, stripping their Ki-84s of excess weight and some armament to improve their climb rate, with the pilots intending to deliberately collide with the giant bombers. These were not often suicide attacks in the traditional kamikaze sense. Some pilots intended to bail out after the attack, using their aircraft as a final desperate weapon. After the war, the Allies conducted extensive evaluations of captured Ki-84s. After fitting them with high-quality American spark plugs and running them on high-octane fuel, U.S. test pilots were stunned by the aircraft's performance. The Technical Air Intelligence Center concluded that the Ki-84 was, in many respects, the most formidable Japanese fighter they had ever encountered. The final verdict on the Hayate is therefore a tragic one. It was a masterpiece of design, an aircraft with the potential to inflict serious tactical losses and complicate the Allies' air superiority if it had arrived in greater numbers with adequate support. But it came too late. It was a brilliant flash of lightning in a gathering storm, a gale that blew with incredible fury, but was ultimately consumed by the hurricane of total war. So, what is the final legacy of the Ki-84 Hayate? Was it one of the greatest fighters of the Pacific War, held back only by a nation on the brink of collapse, or was its complexity a fatal flaw from the start, an overreach of ambition that was doomed to fail? Let us know what you think in the comments. And if you're fascinated by the stories of these incredible war machines, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell to join us on the next historical dig. Until then, remember, history is full of hidden gems if you know where to dig.